I never imagined that the sound of my own voice could be weaponized against me. But there I was, holding my daughter-in-law's phone, trembling, as I hit play during what was supposed to be a peaceful family dinner in our cramped New York apartment. The words I heard cut deeper than any fight I'd had before, and by the night's end, she'd thrown a chair at me, something I never thought possible. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor, and at 72, I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. I was wrong. Living in a tiny two-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens, the walls are paper thin. I can hear Mrs. Chen practicing violin next door, the Rodriguez family arguing upstairs, and the constant hum of traffic on Northern Boulevard below. But nothing prepared me for the silence that would follow that recording. My days started before dawn, with the buzz of the city seeping through cracked windows and the distant wail of sirens outside my building. I shuffled across the grimy linoleum tiles to my old kettle, my bones aching from nights spent restless, tossing and turning as I tried to forget the sting of unspoken battles at home. The tiny apartment reeked of stale coffee and fabric softener, scents that mingled with the dry tears I tried to hide behind drawn curtains when no one was watching. I had hoped that Tuesday's dinner would feel different. Instead, I found myself face to face with an accidental betrayal. A voice recording saved on my daughter-in-law's phone, her voice dripping with venom about me, about my life, about everything I thought we had built together over the years. But let me start from the beginning because this story didn't begin with that recording. It began 23 years ago when I first held my grandson in my arms at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. Little Tommy, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. I was 50 then, recently widowed, my husband Frank having passed from a heart attack just 6 months earlier. I thought this baby would fill the hole in my heart. My son Michael brought his new wife Sandra home from the hospital, and I opened my door, my heart, and eventually my wallet to help them build their new life. Sandra was young then, barely 25, with dreams of becoming an interior designer. She had this way of tilting her head when she spoke, like she was always listening for something better. I should have paid attention to that tilt. For decades, I sacrificed silently for this family. When Michael lost his job at the accounting firm in 2008, I didn't hesitate. I emptied my savings account, $17,000 I'd been putting away for my own retirement, to help them keep our small Queens apartment. The bank teller, a kind Puerto Rican woman named Maria, looked at me with concern as I withdrew almost everything. "Mrs. Castellano, are you sure about this?" she asked. I nodded, my hand steady as I signed the withdrawal slip. Family comes first, I told myself. Family always comes first. When Sandra lost her mother unexpectedly 2 years later, I took her in emotionally, offering comfort and a steady hand, even while my own heart shattered quietly in the loneliness of my bedroom. I remembered holding her as she sobbed in my kitchen, her tears soaking through my floral housecoat. "She never got to see Tommy graduate kindergarten," Sandra whispered. I stroked her hair and promised her that her mother was watching from somewhere better. I believed it then. I wanted to believe it. I attended every family event, from birthdays at Chuck E. Cheese to anniversaries at chain restaurants in Jackson Heights, always masking my exhaustion with a smile. When Tommy turned 7, Sandra organized his party at a community center that cost $300 to rent. "Mom, can you handle the deposit?" Michael asked, not meeting my eyes. I handed over the money without question, watching as Sandra took credit for the beautiful decorations, never mentioning who had funded the celebration. The signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs I was too willing to overlook. Little comments that stung but seemed too small to address. "You should have cleaned the bathroom better, Eleanor. He needs a clean environment," Sandra would say when Tommy came to visit, as if I hadn't raised her husband in this same apartment. I'd scrub that bathroom until my knuckles were raw, desperate to meet her impossible standards. I couldn't keep count of the nights I stayed awake, nursing fevers or comforting tears, only to be met with cold silences at breakfast. Was I being used? The question haunted me during those pre-dawn hours when sleep refused to come. Was love just a duty for me in this family? Sandra's words from that frigid February morning echoed in my mind. "You're just in the way, Eleanor." We need space to grow as a family. Space to grow. Those 4 words followed me everywhere. To the bodega where I bought milk and bread, to the laundromat where I folded clothes alone, to the doctor's office where I sat in waiting rooms with nothing but magazines from 2015 and the echo of her dismissal. For years, my birthday passed like any other day. October 15th would arrive with the same gray sky and honking traffic. But no phone calls, no cards, no acknowledgement that I had entered this world 72 years ago. The pile of unopened birthday cards I'd bought for myself sat in my dresser drawer, a pathetic reminder of wishes that would never be granted. I'd light a single candle on a grocery store cupcake and make the same wish year after year. Please let them love me. When I developed arthritis in my hands 2 years ago, the burning pain shooting through my fingers as I tried to button my cardigan, they brushed aside my struggles with a shrug. "You're being dramatic, Eleanor," Sandra said when I mentioned having trouble opening jars. "Everyone gets old. Deal with it." I dealt with it by wrapping my hands around heating pads each night, tears mixing with the steam as I wondered how caring for their child, their home, their problems had earned me such coldness. The apartment felt smaller each day. The walls, painted a cheerful yellow when Frank and I first moved in 30 years ago, had faded to the color of old newspapers. The couch where I'd rocked Tommy to sleep sagged in the middle, its floral pattern worn thin by decades of use. Family photos lined the mantel: Michael's high school graduation, Tommy's first communion, Sandra's birthday dinner last year where she wore the expensive necklace I'd bought her. In every photo, I stood slightly apart, always on the edge of the frame. One rainy Thursday afternoon in March, I found Sandra's phone slipped between the couch cushions where she'd been sitting the night before. It was a careless mistake on her part, leaving it behind when they'd rushed out to Tommy's soccer practice. We shared an iCloud family account, something Michael had set up years ago so we could share photos more easily. It wasn't hard to access her messages. Curiosity edged out caution as I unlocked the device. My fingers, swollen with arthritis, fumbled across the smooth screen. There, in her voice messages to her friend Jessica, I found words that would haunt me forever. "She's pathetic." Sandra's voice dripped through the phone's speaker, clear as if she were standing right beside me. "Like a ghost haunting our lives. She hovers around Tommy like she's his mother, not his grandmother. And Michael just lets her. It's sick." My hands trembled as the recording continued. "She threw money at us when Mike lost his job. Like that makes her important. Now she acts like we owe her everything. I swear, Jess, sometimes I wish she'd just disappear. Maybe move to one of those senior facilities where she belongs." The plastic cup of tea I'd been holding slipped from my lap, shattering against the linoleum floor. Shards scattered across the kitchen like pieces of my broken heart. I sobbed in silence, choking on the betrayal, my body shaking as Sandra's cruel words played on repeat in my mind. But there was more. Much more. The worst part is how she guilt-trips us, acting all sweet and helpful while she keeps track of every dollar she's spent, every favor she's done. Yesterday, she reminded Mike about paying for Tommy's birthday party 3 months ago. 3 months! She's like a loan shark in a housecoat. Jessica's voice came through the speaker, muffled but audible. "Can't you just tell her to back off? Are you kidding? She'd probably have a heart attack and then we'd be stuck with medical bills too. No, we just have to wait it out. She's got to have some decent savings left, maybe some investments or stocks from when her husband was alive." Mike mentioned she might even have some Bitcoin or cryptocurrency stashed away. His dad was always into that tech stuff before he died. Once we figure out what she's really worth, we can make some decisions about her future. The recording ended with Sandra's laughter, bright and cruel as breaking glass. I sat on my kitchen floor, surrounded by pottery shards and the pieces of my shattered illusions. The thought that flickered through me was terrifying. What if I said no? What if I stopped giving? What if I demanded respect? But fear clawed back, cold and familiar. Fear of being alone in this harsh, indifferent city. Fear of spending my remaining years with nothing but the sound of traffic and neighbors I barely knew. I gathered the family photos from the mantel with shaking hands. Those frozen smiles from Central Park picnics, the wedding day where I'd worn my best dress and proudest smile, birthday celebrations where I'd stood just outside the circle of happiness. I packed them away in a shoebox, each image a reminder of love I'd thought was real. Then, Slowly, I walked to my bathroom mirror and stared at the woman looking back at me. 72 years old, silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, brown eyes that had seen too much disappointment. This woman had raised a son, buried a husband, survived decades of quiet heartbreak. She deserved better than Sandra's cruelty. She deserved better than Michael's willful blindness. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cooked dinner just for myself, not a large meal meant to feed ungrateful mouths, but a simple plate of pasta with butter and Parmesan cheese. I ate slowly, tasting each bite, listening to the sounds of the city beyond my windows. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for anyone to call. I wasn't hoping for approval or gratitude. I was simply, quietly, alone with my thoughts. But Sandra's words haunted my sleep. Her laughter echoed through my dreams, mixing with memories of all the times I'd bitten my tongue, swallowed my pride, accepted less than I deserved. I woke up angry, and that anger felt foreign and powerful in my chest. The next morning, I called my son. Michael answered on the fourth ring, his voice distracted. "Hey, Mom. What's up? I'm heading into a meeting. I need to talk to you about Sandra," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. There was a pause. "What about her?" "I heard some things that hurt me deeply." His tone shifted, becoming defensive. "Mom, what are you talking about?" When I described the recording, his response cut deeper than Sandra's original cruelty. "Mom, you're imagining things. That doesn't sound like Sandra at all. Maybe you misheard something on TV. Or maybe you dreamed it. You know how confused you get sometimes." Confused. As if 30 years of marriage, raising a child, managing a household had left me incapable of distinguishing reality from fantasy. As if the arthritis in my hands had somehow traveled to my brain. "Michael, I know what I heard. Look, Mom, I don't have time for this. Sandra loves you. We all do. But maybe you're feeling isolated, you know? Maybe it's time to think about making some friends your own age, joining a senior center or something." The conversation ended with him hanging up, leaving me holding a dead phone, and the growing realization that my son had chosen his wife's version of reality over his mother's truth. Sandra's reaction was worse. When I confronted her that evening, her face remained perfectly composed, almost rehearsed. "Eleanor, I'm disappointed in you. Going through my personal belongings is a serious invasion of privacy. I trusted you, and this is how you repay that trust?" She turned my discovery of her cruelty into my moral failing. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. "I never said those things," she continued, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "But if that's how you interpreted whatever you think you heard, maybe we need to reassess our relationship. Maybe you're not as stable as we thought." The emotional blackmail poured out like water from a broken pipe. "If you're going to make accusations like this, you won't be seeing Tommy anymore. I can't have him exposed to this kind of paranoid thinking. What if you start imagining things about him, too?" I felt crushed, drowning in a sea of contradictions and gaslight. But in the darkness of that moment, an unexpected light appeared. Rosa Morales lived 3 doors down the hall, in apartment 4C. She was 68, a retired nurse who'd moved from Puerto Rico 20 years earlier. I'd seen her in the hallway countless times, but never really talked to her beyond polite greetings and comments about the weather. That changed the day after my confrontation with Sandra. Rosa knocked on my door around noon, holding a plate covered with aluminum foil. "Eleanor, mi amor, you look terrible. What's wrong?" Something about her direct kindness, so different from the careful cruelty I'd grown accustomed to, broke open the dam I'd built around my emotions. I invited her in and, over cups of sweet coffee, told her everything. The recording, the denial, the manipulation, the threats. Rosa listened without interrupting, her dark eyes fierce with indignation. When I finished, she leaned forward and took my hands in hers. "Abuela, listen to me carefully. You are worth more than their words. No one gets to choose your value except you. No one." She visited every day after that, bringing warmth that had been missing from my home for years. We talked about everything. Her grandchildren in San Juan, my memories of Frank, our shared experiences as women who'd given too much and received too little. Rosa had her own stories of ungrateful relatives and thankless sacrifices. But she'd learned something I was just beginning to understand. Self-respect isn't selfish. You know what I did when my nephew started treating me like his personal ATM? Rosa asked one afternoon, stirring sugar into her coffee. I told him the Bank of Rosa was permanently closed. He got mad, called me names, said I was abandoning family. But you know what happened? 6 months later, he came back. Not for money, but to apologize. Sometimes people need to feel the cold before they appreciate the warmth. Those words planted a seed in my mind. What if I closed the Bank of Eleanor? What if I stopped being so available, so giving, so willing to absorb their cruelty in exchange for scraps of attention? The opportunity came sooner than expected. The following Tuesday, Michael called with his familiar request. Mom, Sandra's car needs new tires, and we're a little short this month. Could you help us out? Maybe $800? For 23 years, I would have said yes immediately. I would have worried about their safety, their comfort, their needs above my own. But Sandra's voice echoed in my memory. She's like a loan shark in a housecoat. No, I said quietly. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. What do you mean, no? I mean, I won't be giving you money anymore, Michael, for tires or anything else. His anger was immediate and palpable. Mom, what's gotten into you? We need this money. Sandra's been getting rides to work from her friend, but that can't continue forever. Then perhaps Sandra should ask her friend for a loan. You know we're good for it. We always pay you back. That was a lie we both knew. In 23 years of borrowing money, they'd repaid maybe 10% of what they'd taken, but I'd never kept score, never demanded receipts or timelines. I'd been happy to give, grateful for the chance to be useful. The answer is no, Michael. Please respect that. He hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. No nightmares of rejection, no anxiety about disappointing anyone, just calm, deep breathing in my small, neat bedroom. The power to say no had awakened something inside me that I'd thought was long dead. The next morning, I called Legal Aid of New York and scheduled an appointment. The lawyer, a young woman named Patricia Chen, listened patiently as I explained my situation. She helped me understand my rights regarding my savings, my Social Security, my small pension from Frank's union job. Mrs. Castellano, she said, you have no legal obligation to financially support your adult son and his family. If you want to separate your accounts, change your passwords, or limit their access to your resources, that's entirely your right. We spent 2 hours filling out paperwork. I changed my bank account passwords, removed Michael and Sandra from my emergency contact lists, and established a separate savings account they couldn't access. It felt like building walls around my heart, but walls that protected rather than imprisoned. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I bought myself a gift. Using the money I would have spent on Sandra's car tires, I purchased a ticket to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. Rosa and I rode the subway together, 2 women rediscovering joy in simple pleasures. We walked through the cherry blossom grove, breathed in the scent of spring flowers, and ate overpriced sandwiches on a bench overlooking the Japanese hill and pond garden. How does it feel? Rosa asked, watching me feed crumbs to a family of ducks. Scared, I admitted, but also free. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't responsible for anyone else's problems, happiness, or financial stability. The feeling was terrifying and exhilarating. Michael called 2 weeks later, his voice strained. Mom, we need to talk. Can we come for dinner this Sunday? I almost said yes automatically. The old Eleanor would have spent days cooking, cleaning, worrying about their comfort and approval. Instead, I heard myself saying, if you'd like to have a conversation, you're welcome to come. But I won't be cooking a large meal. We can order pizza. Sunday arrived gray and drizzly, typical spring weather in New York. Michael and Sandra arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, Tommy trailing behind them with his Nintendo Switch. My grandson had grown taller in the weeks since I'd seen him, all arms and legs like a young colt. He gave me a quick, distracted hug before settling on the couch with his game. The tension in my small living room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sandra wore a new dress, something expensive-looking in pale blue that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Michael fidgeted with his phone, avoiding eye contact. Before anyone could launch into prepared speeches, I stood and walked to my bedroom. From under the bed, I retrieved the shoebox where I'd stored our family photos. I carried it back to the living room and set it on the coffee table between us. "I want to show you something," I said, opening the box. The first photo was from Michael's high school graduation in 1995. 18-year-old Michael in his cap and gown, Frank and I beaming with pride on either side of him. In the photo, I'm wearing a yellow dress I'd saved for months to buy, my hair carefully styled, my smile genuine and full of hope for my son's future. I held the photo for a moment, remembering that day, the pride I'd felt watching Michael walk across the stage, the dreams I'd had for his success, his happiness, his family. Then, slowly and deliberately, I tore the photo in half. Sandra gasped. Tommy looked up from his game, confused. Michael's face went pale. I reached for another photo. Tommy's first Christmas. 3 generations gathered around our tiny tree. I tore that one too, letting the pieces flutter onto the worn carpet. "What are you doing?" Michael whispered. "I'm done," I said quietly, my voice steadier than my hands. "I'm done being the grandmother who gives everything and receives nothing. I'm done being the mother-in-law who's tolerated instead of loved. I'm done buying affection and accepting scraps of attention in return." Photo after photo, I tore them apart. Birthday parties I'd funded, holidays I'd hosted, celebrations where I'd stood just outside the circle of happiness, always giving, never truly included. "I will no longer buy love," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I will no longer finance your lifestyle while you mock me behind my back. I will no longer accept disrespect in exchange for the privilege of knowing my grandson." Sandra's carefully composed mask finally slipped. "You're being ridiculous, Eleanor. Tearing up pictures like some kind of crazy person. This is exactly why we worry about your mental state." "My mental state?" I laughed, a sound that surprised even me. "My mental state is fine. It's my self-respect that needed work." The room fell silent, except for the electronic sounds from Tommy's game and the distant noise of traffic outside. Finally, Sandra tried a different approach. Tears, guilt trips, promises that rang hollow in the stale air of my living room. "Eleanor, I'm sorry if I ever said anything that hurt you. Sometimes friends exaggerate when they're venting, you know? You've been such a wonderful help to our family. We love you so much. But I was different now. The woman who would have melted at the first sign of false remorse was gone, replaced by someone harder and infinitely more valuable. I stood unmoved as they reached for control they no longer possessed. "Respect me or lose me," I said simply. "Those are your choices." Michael finally spoke, his voice pleading. "Mom, please. Your family. We can work this out. Family doesn't record cruel conversations about each other and share them with friends. Family doesn't call their grandmother a ghost haunting their lives. Family doesn't plot about someone's investments and assets while pretending to love them." Sandra's face flushed red. She'd realized I knew about more than just one recording. "You had no right to go through my private messages. You had no right to treat me like a convenient ATM with feelings you could disregard whenever it suited you." The confrontation continued for another hour. Voices raised, accusations flying, old wounds ripped open. But I remained calm in the center of their storm, no longer the woman who absorbed their anger and transformed it into guilt and self-doubt. When they finally left, Tommy confused and upset, Sandra's makeup smeared from angry tears, Michael still trying to negotiate some middle ground that didn't exist. I felt empty, but not broken, tired but not defeated. I spent that evening cleaning up the torn photographs, each piece a small liberation. These weren't just pictures of the past. They were evidence of a version of myself I no longer recognized. A woman so hungry for love that she'd accepted cruelty as its substitute. 3 weeks passed in blessed quiet. Rosa and I established a routine of afternoon coffee and evening walks around the neighborhood. I discovered a senior center 2 blocks from my apartment that offered art classes, book clubs, and social activities. For the first time in years, I had places to go that had nothing to do with family obligations. The senior center was housed in an old church building, its stained glass windows casting colored shadows across linoleum floors. The art instructor, a patient woman named Mrs. Kim, introduced me to watercolor painting. My arthritic hands struggled with the brushes at first, but something about mixing colors on paper felt like magic. I painted flowers from memory, the view from my kitchen window, abstract swirls that somehow captured emotions I couldn't put into words. I also joined a book club led by a retired English teacher named Dorothy. The first book we read was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and sitting in that circle of women discussing love, sacrifice, and self-discovery felt like finding a tribe I never knew existed. These women had stories too, children who'd disappointed them, spouses who'd taken them for granted, years of quiet endurance followed by hard-won wisdom. Just when I thought the dust had settled, when I'd begun to believe that maybe this new life was possible, Sandra struck back in a way I hadn't anticipated. I first learned about it from my neighbor Mrs. Chen, the violinist. She knocked on my door one evening, her face concerned and embarrassed. "Eleanor, I don't know how to tell you this, but there's something going around the building. About you?" My stomach dropped. "What kind of something?" Mrs. Chen shifted uncomfortably. "Sandra came to see me last week. She said she was worried about your mental health, that you'd been acting paranoid, accusing them of things they never did. She said you'd been looking through her phone, stealing from her purse, making up wild stories." The lie was so smooth, so believable, that even Mrs. Chen seemed half convinced, despite her obvious affection for me. Sandra had gotten ahead of the story, painting me as the villain of my own liberation. "She's been talking to other neighbors too," Mrs. Chen continued. "The Johnsons upstairs, the Rodriguez family, even the superintendent. She said she wanted people to keep an eye on you, to call Michael if they noticed any concerning behavior." I felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in my chest, but this time it transformed into something harder and more useful. Anger. Pure, clarifying anger. That night, I called Patricia Chen, my legal aid lawyer. "They're trying to make me look incompetent," I explained, "to justify taking control of my finances or having me declared unfit. Do you have any evidence of what actually happened?" Patricia asked. "Any proof of these recordings you mentioned?" I did. I'd been smart enough to forward Sandra's voice messages to my own phone before returning hers. I had documentation of every financial transaction, every loan that had never been repaid. I had statements from my doctor confirming my mental competency. "Keep records of everything," Patricia advised. "If they escalate this, we'll be ready." But Sandra wasn't finished. 3 days later, I received a call from Adult Protective Services. A woman named Janet Kumar introduced herself and explained that they'd received a report of potential elder abuse, self-neglect, paranoid behavior, possible dementia. "I'd like to schedule a home visit," she said kindly. "Just to check in, make sure you're doing okay." I agreed to meet with her, knowing I had nothing to hide. Janet arrived the following Tuesday, a middle-aged Indian woman with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. She spent 2 hours in my apartment, checking my groceries, my medications, my bill-paying system. We talked about my daily routine, my social connections, my mental health. "Mrs. Castellano, you seem completely competent to me," she said finally. "Your home is clean. You're well-groomed. You're articulate and oriented. I'm not sure why someone would report concerns about your well-being." "Perhaps," I said carefully, "because I recently stopped giving money to family members who'd grown accustomed to my generosity." Janet nodded knowingly. "Ah, I see this more often than you might think. Family members sometimes interpret financial boundaries as signs of mental decline, especially when they've been benefiting from previous generosity." She closed her file with a decisive snap. "I'll be noting in my report that you're managing independently and show no signs of cognitive impairment or self-neglect. If anyone contacts our office again with concerns about you, they'll need to provide specific evidence of problems, not just general worries." After Janet left, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, marveling at how Sandra's attempt to discredit me had backfired. I now had official documentation of my competency, legal protection against future accusations, and a growing network of support from neighbors who'd seen through her manipulation. But the cruelest blow was still to come. 2 weeks after the APS visit, Tommy appeared at my door alone. My 11-year-old grandson stood in the hallway, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, his school backpack sliding off his shoulder. Grandma Ellie? His voice was small, uncertain. Can I come in? I pulled him into my apartment and straight into my arms, breathing in the scent of his hair, still that mixture of playground dirt and store-brand shampoo that meant childhood. Of course, sweetheart. What are you doing here by yourself? Mom said I couldn't see you anymore because you're sick in your head. But you don't seem sick to me. You seem like the same Grandma Ellie. My heart cracked open. I'm not sick, Tommy. Sometimes adults disagree about things, and sometimes they say things that aren't true when they're angry or hurt. Are you angry at Mom and Dad? I considered lying, giving him some sanitized version that would protect his relationship with his parents. But looking into his serious brown eyes, I decided he deserved honesty. I'm disappointed in them, I said carefully. They've made some choices that hurt my feelings very much, but that doesn't change how much I love you. We spent the afternoon together, playing board games and talking about school, his friends, his dreams of becoming a marine biologist. When Sandra called, frantic and furious, demanding to know where Tommy was, I calmly told her he was safe with me and would be home before dinner. You can't just take him without permission, she screamed into the phone. I didn't take him. He came to me. Maybe you should ask yourself why your son felt the need to sneak out to visit his grandmother. That evening, as I walked Tommy back to their apartment building 6 blocks away, he slipped his small hand into mine. Grandma Ellie, why did Mom say you were trying to steal money from us? I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes people say things that aren't true when they're scared or confused. At his building's entrance, Sandra waited with the fury of a protective mother and the calculation of someone whose lies had been exposed. She pulled Tommy away from me so forcefully that he stumbled. Don't you ever contact my son again, she hissed, loud enough for other residents to hear. If you come near him, I'll call the police. But Tommy looked back as she dragged him inside, and I saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. Questions, doubt about his mother's version of events, the realization that perhaps his grandmother wasn't the villain in this story after all. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my lawyer and asked her to draft a letter detailing Sandra's harassment, her false reports to APS, her attempts to alienate me from my grandson. I also asked her to research my rights regarding grandparent visitation in New York State. You have limited rights, Patricia explained, but if you can prove that maintaining a relationship with Tommy is in his best interest, and that the parents are unreasonably preventing contact, you might have options. I spent the next month documenting everything. Sandra's voice recordings saved on my phone, financial records showing the money I'd lent over the years, statements from neighbors about Sandra's campaign to discredit me, character references from Rosa, from my art teacher, from Dorothy at the book club. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Rodriguez from upstairs knocked on my door one evening, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Eleanor, I owe you an apology. That woman, Sandra, she came to me with such stories about you. But today I saw her at the grocery store, talking to her friend about how she's worried you might change your will if you stay angry. She said something about hoping you'd invested in good stocks or maybe Bitcoin like your husband did, and that they needed to get back in your good graces before you died and left everything to charity. Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head in disgust. She wasn't worried about your mental health, Elena. She was worried about your money. I'm sorry I believed her lies. Armed with this new evidence of Sandra's real motives, I scheduled a family meeting. Not the kind where I invited them for dinner and hoped for reconciliation, but a formal meeting with my lawyer present. I rented a conference room at a local community center and sent official notices to Michael and Sandra, stating that their attendance was required to discuss matters regarding family relationships and future estate planning. They came reluctantly, Sandra dressed as if for battle in a severe black suit, Michael looking like a man walking to his own execution. Patricia sat beside me, professional and unsmiling, a stack of folders on the table before her. We're here today, Patricia began, because my client has been subjected to harassment, defamation, and financial exploitation by members of her family. She's asked me to document these incidents and to make her position regarding future relationships clear. For the next hour, we laid out everything: the recordings, the false reports, the years of financial exploitation, Sandra's campaign to discredit me in the building, the attempt to prevent me from seeing Tommy. Sandra tried to interrupt, to explain, to minimize. But Patricia cut her off each time. This is not a negotiation. This is a documentation of facts. Finally, I spoke. Michael, you are my son, and I will always love you. But I will not continue to be treated as a convenient source of money and free childcare while being mocked and disrespected behind my back. Sandra, you have shown me exactly what you think of me, and I believe you. I no longer want a relationship with someone who views me as an obstacle to overcome, rather than a person deserving of basic respect. I pulled out a document Patricia had prepared, a formal letter outlining new terms for any future relationship. No more financial support. No more emergency loans, scheduled visits with Tommy in neutral locations, an end to free babysitting and household help. These are my boundaries, I said. Accept them or don't. But understand that the woman who used to beg for scraps of your attention is gone. Either treat me as an equal member of this family or leave me in peace. Sandra's mask finally fell completely. You selfish old woman. After everything we've done for you, all the times we've included you in our lives when we could have just ignored you, you think you can just cut us off? Tommy is our son, not yours. Exactly, I replied calmly. He is your son. Raise him with your own resources, on your own time, in your own way. Stop expecting me to fund and facilitate your parenting while being treated like an embarrassing obligation. Michael, who had remained silent through most of the meeting, finally found his voice. Mom, please, can't we work something out? I know Sandra sometimes says things when she's stressed, but she doesn't mean... She recorded herself saying those things, Michael. She didn't just think them in a moment of stress. She voiced them, laughed about them, shared them with friends. Those words came from a deep place of contempt that no amount of stress can excuse. The meeting ended with no reconciliation, no tearful apologies, no promises of change. Sandra stormed out, muttering about ungrateful in-laws and threatening to make sure I never saw Tommy again. Michael lingered, looking lost and confused. But ultimately he followed his wife. Patricia and I sat in the empty conference room for a few minutes after they left, listening to the distant sounds of children playing in the community center's gymnasium. How do you feel? She asked. Free, I said, and meant it. That evening, I cooked dinner for Rosa and myself. Nothing fancy, just pasta with marinara sauce and a salad from vegetables I'd grown in small pots on my fire escape. We ate by candlelight. Two women who'd learned the hard way that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop trying to purchase affection from people who've decided you're not worth their genuine care. You know what I realized today? I told Rosa as we cleared the dishes. I spent so many years afraid of being alone that I forgot there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I was lonelier in that relationship with Michael and Sandra than I've ever been by myself. Rosa nodded, understanding completely. Mi amor, you can't be truly connected to anyone else until you're connected to yourself, and you can't love others properly until you love yourself enough to demand respect. 6 months passed. Long, quiet months where I discovered what my life looked like when it belonged entirely to me. I took a pottery class and found I had a talent for creating small, beautiful bowls and vases. My hands, despite their arthritis, seemed to know intuitively how to shape clay into something useful and lovely. I started volunteering at a local literacy program, helping immigrant women learn English. 2 afternoons a week, I sat in a circle with women from Mexico, Bangladesh, Somalia, and China, all of us stumbling through pronunciation and grammar while sharing stories of the lives we'd left behind and the futures we were building. My apartment transformed too. I replaced the heavy, dark curtains with light, airy panels that let in the afternoon sun. I painted the walls, not the cheerful yellow Frank and I had chosen decades ago, but a calming sage green that made the small space feel like a sanctuary. I bought new furniture piece by piece, each item chosen for my comfort alone, not to accommodate visitors who never appreciated the effort. The senior center became my second home. I joined the walking group that met every Tuesday and Thursday, exploring different neighborhoods throughout the city. I started taking a Spanish class, partly to better communicate with my volunteer work, but mostly because learning something new made me feel vibrant and alive. And I dated. Yes, at 72, I went on actual dates. Nothing serious, just coffee with a widower named George that I met at the library, dinner with a retired teacher named Philip from my book club. It felt strange at first, getting dressed up for someone new, sharing stories of my life that didn't center around my ungrateful family. But it also felt wonderful to be seen as a complete person again, not just someone's mother or grandmother or source of financial support. The holidays came and went without invitation or obligation. I spent Thanksgiving with Rose's extended family, a raucous gathering of 3 generations crowded into her nephew's apartment in Union City. I brought my homemade cranberry sauce and was welcomed with genuine warmth into their celebration. Christmas Eve I spent at the Senior Center's party, playing bingo and singing carols with people who appreciated my presence without expecting anything from me. I thought about Tommy often, wondering how tall he'd grown, whether he still wanted to be a marine biologist if he ever asked about the grandmother who'd disappeared from his life. Several times I was tempted to reach out, to send a card or small gift, but I held firm. The boundary I'd established protected both of us. Tommy needed to understand that relationships required mutual respect, and Sandra and Michael needed to feel the real consequences of their choices. The test of my resolve came in March, almost a year after that terrible family meeting. I was returning from grocery shopping, my wheeled cart full of provisions for the week ahead, when I saw a familiar figure sitting on the front steps of my building. Tommy had grown at least 4 inches. His face was thinner, more angular, the baby roundness finally giving way to the young man he was becoming. He stood when he saw me, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of a jacket that was slightly too small for his lengthening arms. "Hi, Grandma Ellie." "Hello, sweetheart." I kept my voice calm, though my heart was racing. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to see you. Mom said I wasn't allowed, but I'm 12 now. I can make some decisions for myself." 12. I'd missed his birthday. I'd missed a whole year of his growing up because his parents had chosen cruelty over compromise. "How did you get here?" "Subway. I'm old enough to ride alone now. Mom doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I'm at basketball practice." I studied his face, seeing traces of the little boy who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read him stories, but also something new, a seriousness that hadn't been there before, a wariness that broke my heart. "Would you like to come up for a while? I have cookies." His face brightened with the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. "Homemade?" "Store-bought, I'm afraid. But still good." We climbed the 3 flights to my apartment, Tommy's long legs taking the stairs 2 at a time, while I huffed behind him, my shopping cart bumping on each step. Inside, he looked around with curious eyes. "It looks different in here. I've made some changes. Do you like it?" He nodded, running his fingers along the arm of my new sofa, studying the watercolor paintings I'd hung on the walls. "It looks happy, like peaceful." We sat at my small kitchen table with glasses of milk and a package of Oreos between us. For a few minutes, we just ate cookies and looked at each other, both of us trying to bridge a year's worth of silence. "Mom said you got sick and started saying mean things about her," Tommy finally said. "But you don't seem sick. You seem better than before, actually. Less tired." "I'm not sick, Tommy. Your mom and I disagreed about some things, and she didn't like that disagreement. Sometimes adults handle conflict poorly. She said you tried to steal money from us." I chose my words carefully. "I stopped giving your parents money when I realized they didn't appreciate it. That's different from stealing, but I can understand how it might feel similar if someone was used to receiving something and then suddenly didn't." Tommy nodded slowly, processing this information with the careful seriousness of a child who'd learned not to take adult explanations at face value. "I missed you," he said suddenly, his voice smaller. "I know Mom said you didn't want to see me anymore, but that didn't feel right. You always wanted to see me before. I missed you too, sweetheart. Every day. But sometimes adults have to make difficult choices to protect themselves, even when those choices hurt people they love." We talked for 2 hours. Tommy told me about school, his friends, his basketball team. He'd given up on marine biology and now wanted to be an engineer. He was struggling with math but excelling in English. He'd gotten glasses and braces since I'd seen him last. As afternoon faded into evening, I knew he needed to get home. "Tommy, I want you to know that I love you completely and that will never change. but I can't have a relationship with your parents right now, and that means our visits will be limited. It's not fair to ask you to sneak around, and it's not healthy for any of us. I know. I just wanted to see you once, to make sure you were okay. I'm more than okay, sweetheart. I'm happy. Maybe happier than I've been in years. As I walked him back to the subway station, Tommy slipped his hand into mine like he used to do when he was small. Grandma Ellie? I think Mom was wrong about you. You're not sick or mean or any of the things she said. You just got tired of being treated badly. Out of the mouths of babes. My 12-year-old grandson had understood in 2 hours what his parents had refused to acknowledge in decades. At the subway entrance, Tommy hugged me tight. Can I come see you again sometime? If you ever really need me, really truly need me, call. I'll always be here for you. But I won't be part of the games your parents play anymore. He nodded solemnly, handed me a folded piece of paper, and disappeared down the stairs into the crowded station. I waited until I was back in my apartment to read what he'd written. Dear Grandma Ellie, I'm sorry Mom and Dad were mean to you. You deserved better. I hope when I grow up I'll be brave enough to stand up for myself like you did. I love you. Tommy. P.S. I still think about becoming a marine biologist sometimes. I cried then, for the first time in months. Not tears of sadness or regret, but tears of gratitude for a grandson wise enough to see through his parents' manipulation and brave enough to seek out the truth for himself. That night, I called Rosa and told her about Tommy's visit. We talked for hours about the complicated nature of love, about the courage required to set boundaries with people who'd grown comfortable with our boundless giving. You've given that boy the greatest gift, Rosa said. You've shown him what self-respect looks like. Someday, when he's a man dealing with his own relationships, he'll remember his grandmother who refused to accept less than she deserved. Spring turned to summer, and my new life took on a comfortable rhythm. I was no longer the woman frantically trying to earn love through service and sacrifice. I was Eleanor Castellano, individual human being, worthy of respect and kindness simply by virtue of existing. My art improved. The small watercolors became larger canvases, abstract pieces that captured the emotional journey from doormat to empowered woman. Mrs. Kim, my art instructor, encouraged me to enter a piece in the Senior Center's annual art show. I chose a painting I'd titled Liberation, swirls of dark purple and gray giving way to brilliant yellow and orange, like a sunrise after the longest night. The painting won second place. I stood in front of it at the awards ceremony, wearing a new dress in deep blue that hugged my shoulders just right, accepting applause from people who celebrated my achievement without wondering what was in it for them. George, the widower from the library, attended the ceremony as my guest. Afterward, over coffee at a diner in Forest Hills, he asked about my family. I have a son and grandson, I told him. We're not in contact right now, but I love them both. That must be difficult. It is, but it's also been necessary. I spent so many years being afraid of losing them that I lost myself instead. George nodded with the understanding of someone who'd faced his own hard choices about family relationships. My sister and I didn't speak for 10 years after my wife died. She disapproved of how I was grieving, thought I should get over it faster, move on sooner. It wasn't until I stopped trying to win her approval that we were able to have an honest relationship. Are you close now? Closer than we ever were when I was performing the role of the brother she wanted instead of being the man I actually am. That conversation stayed with me as I walked home through the familiar streets of Astoria. Maybe someday Michael would grow into the kind of man who could apologize for allowing his wife to treat his mother cruelly. Maybe someday Sandra would face whatever insecurities drove her to tear down other people. Maybe someday Tommy would bring his own children to meet his grandmother, and I could love them with the wisdom I'd gained from learning to love myself, but maybe not. And for the first time in my life, that possibility didn't terrify me. Now, 2 years after that devastating voice recording, I sit in my peaceful apartment as the sun sets beyond the Queen's skyline, painting watercolors of the view from my window. The walls are covered with my artwork, photographs of the friends I've made, mementos from places I've traveled to on my own. Rosa and I are planning a trip to Puerto Rico next winter, a chance for her to visit family and for me to see a part of the world I've never explored. My phone rings occasionally. Sometimes it's George, asking if I'd like to see a movie. Sometimes it's Patricia, my lawyer, checking in to make sure no one is harassing me. Sometimes it's one of my volunteer students, calling to thank me for helping her pass her citizenship test or land her first job using English. My phone doesn't ring with requests for money, guilt trips about missed visits, or manipulation disguised as love. The silence used to frighten me. Now it sounds like freedom. I keep Tommy's note in my jewelry box, next to the earrings Frank gave me for our 20th anniversary and the ring that belonged to my mother. Sometimes I take it out and read it again, marveling at the wisdom of a child who understood intuitively what it took me 7 decades to learn, that love without respect is not love at all. The other night, I heard Sandra's voice again, not in a recording this time, but in the hallway outside my apartment. She was talking to Mrs. Chen, her voice loud enough to carry through the thin walls. "I'm worried about Eleanor. She's become so isolated, so bitter. I've tried to reach out, but she won't return my calls. I think she might be depressed." I listened from my kitchen, no longer feeling the familiar stab of anxiety at her manipulation. Mrs. Chen's response was perfectly polite and completely dismissive. "Eleanor seems quite well to me. She's very active in the building, always helping with community events. She has many friends here." Sandra tried again. "But she's cut herself off from family. That's not healthy for someone her age." "Perhaps," Mrs. Chen replied with the careful diplomacy of someone who'd learned the truth about the situation. "Family relationships are healthiest when they're based on mutual respect rather than obligation." I smiled as I heard Sandra's footsteps retreat down the hallway. My neighbor had understood what my own son still refused to acknowledge, that I hadn't cut myself off from family. I'd cut myself off from people who treated me as a convenient resource rather than a person deserving of love and respect. This afternoon, while watering the small herb garden I've created on my fire escape, I saw a familiar figure across the street. Tommy, now 13 and taller than his father, walking with a group of friends toward the subway station. He looked happy, confident, surrounded by peers who seemed to genuinely enjoy his company. For a moment, I considered calling out to him, but I didn't. He has his own path to walk, his own relationships to navigate, his own lessons to learn about love and respect, and the courage required to demand both. If he needs me, he knows where I am. If he doesn't, that's okay too. I am no longer defined by my relationships with other people, even the ones I love most. I am Eleanor Castellano, artist, volunteer, friend, individual human being, worthy of love and respect, not because of what I provide to others, but simply because I exist. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in the same oranges and purples I've learned to capture on canvas. In the distance, I can hear the sounds of the city coming alive for another evening. Sirens and car horns, the laughter of children playing in nearby parks, the rich tapestry of human life continuing in all its messy complexity. I pour myself a glass of wine, something I rarely did when every evening was spent in anxious anticipation of family phone calls or visits. Tonight, like every night now, belongs entirely to me. I might call Rosa and see if she wants to walk down to the Greek restaurant on 30th Avenue for dinner. I might finish reading the novel I started yesterday. I might simply sit here with my wine and my watercolors, grateful for the peace that comes with finally understanding my own worth. If you're listening to this story and recognizing pieces of your own life, know this: it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. It's never too late to stop accepting crumbs from people who should be offering you a place at their table. It's never too late to discover that the love you've been frantically seeking outside yourself has been waiting patiently within you all along. The price of self-respect is sometimes loneliness, but the cost of self-abandonment is always the loss of your soul. I learned that lesson later than I should have, but not too late to matter. Every day I wake up in my peaceful apartment, surrounded by art I've created and friendships I've nurtured, is proof that it's possible to rebuild a life on the foundation of self-love rather than the quicksand of other people's approval. Have you ever found yourself giving everything to people who respected you so little they plotted behind your back about your assets and your future? Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was systematically undermining your reputation while benefiting from your generosity? Have you ever had to choose between dignity and family, knowing that choosing dignity might mean losing people you love? Tell me your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is share our experiences with others who understand the particular pain of loving people who see us as convenient rather than cherished. But my story doesn't end with that sunset painting session, because life rarely provides such neat conclusions. The most important lessons often come in the quiet aftermath, in the small choices we make every day to honor the boundaries we've fought so hard to establish. 3 months after Tommy's surprise visit, I received an unexpected phone call. It was late October, just past my 73rd birthday, another birthday that had passed without acknowledgement from Michael and Sandra, but this time I'd celebrated with friends from the senior center, blowing out candles on a cake that Rosa had insisted on ordering from the fancy Italian bakery on Ditmars Boulevard. The caller ID showed Michael's number, and my first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. But something made me answer. "Hello, Michael." "Mom." His voice sounded different, smaller, somehow, uncertain. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me." I waited, not rushing to fill the silence with reassurances that would have been lies anyway. "Sandra and we're having problems. Big problems. She moved out last week, took Tommy with her to her sister's place in New Jersey." I felt a complex mixture of emotions: concern for Tommy, sadness for the family that was fracturing, and underneath it all, a kind of weary recognition. Crisis had a way of clarifying people's priorities, of showing them who they could really count on. "I'm sorry to hear that, Michael. How is Tommy handling it?" He's angry. At both of us, but especially at Sandra. He keeps asking about you. Asking why we stopped him from seeing you. Why Sandra said all those things about you being sick when you clearly weren't." Michael's voice cracked slightly. "Mom, I think I made a terrible mistake. I chose Sandra's version of events because it was easier than admitting my wife had been cruel to my mother. Because if I acknowledged how badly she'd treated you, I'd have to face how badly I'd treated you too, by allowing it." The apology I'd waited years to hear was finally coming, but it landed differently than I'd expected. Instead of vindication or relief, I felt a kind of sad clarity. This crisis hadn't created Michael's capacity for insight. It had simply made honesty more necessary than self-deception. "Michael, I appreciate you calling, I really do. But I need you to understand something. My boundaries weren't just about Sandra. They were about the entire dynamic in our family. About decades of me accepting less than I deserved, because I was afraid of losing what little connection I had. I know. I see that now. And I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I believe you are. But I need more than an apology. I need to know that you understand why things had to change, and that you won't ask me to go back to the way things were before." We talked for nearly an hour. Michael told me about the marriage counseling sessions where Sandra had refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, about the financial struggles that had worsened without my regular contributions, about Tommy's growing resentment toward both his parents. It was clear that the family structure they'd built on the foundation of my endless giving had crumbled without that support. "Tommy wants to see you," Michael said finally. "He's been asking constantly." "Sandra says absolutely not. That you're a bad influence, that you turned him against us with lies. But I think maybe it's time I started making decisions based on what's right instead of what's easiest." The old Eleanor would have jumped at the chance to reconcile, to have her family back, to return to a role that felt familiar even if it had been painful. But I'd learned too much about myself to go backward. "I'm willing to see Tommy," I said carefully, but with conditions. No more financial support from me to you or Sandra. No more free babysitting or emergency childcare. If Tommy wants a relationship with me, it needs to be because he values spending time with me, not because I'm useful to his parents. That's fair. More than fair. And Michael, if you're hoping this crisis will make me forgive and forget everything that happened, you're going to be disappointed. I'm not the same woman I was 2 years ago. I won't pour myself out endlessly for people who don't appreciate it, even if one of those people is my son. There was a long pause. "I understand. And honestly, I respect you for it. I should have respected you for it a long time ago." We arranged for Tommy to visit me the following Saturday. I spent the week preparing, but not in the old way. Not frantically cleaning and cooking and trying to create the perfect environment. Instead, I prepared emotionally, reminding myself of the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish, the self-respect I'd fought to reclaim. When Tommy arrived that Saturday afternoon, he'd grown even taller in the month since I'd seen him. At 13, he was all sharp angles and nervous energy, but his hug was still fierce and genuine. "Grandma Ellie, I missed you so much." "I missed you too, sweetheart." We spent the afternoon much as we had during his secret visit, talking, playing games, sharing stories. But this time, there was less wariness in his manner, less sense that he was doing something forbidden. Michael had driven him over and would pick him up later, a tacit acknowledgement that this relationship was now approved rather than merely tolerated. "Mom and Dad are getting divorced," Tommy told me as we worked on a jigsaw puzzle at my kitchen table. "How do you feel about that?" He shrugged, but his movements were tense. "Kinda relieved, I guess. They've been fighting a lot. And Mom keeps saying bad stuff about you and Dad just lets her. And I hate it. I told Dad I wanted to live with him, even though his apartment is smaller. That must have been a difficult conversation." "Yeah." Mom got really mad. Said I was choosing sides, that you'd poisoned me against her. But I told her nobody poisoned me. I just finally figured out that she was lying about you. And if she'd lie about something that big, what else was she lying about? Again, I was struck by Tommy's emotional intelligence, his ability to see through adult manipulation that had fooled me for far too long. "That was very brave of you to speak up. I learned it from you," he said simply. "When you stopped letting them treat you badly, it showed me that I didn't have to let people treat me badly either." We were interrupted by the sound of my doorbell. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I checked the peephole, I saw Sandra standing in the hallway. She looked different, thinner, more brittle, her careful composure replaced by barely controlled anger. Tommy had moved to the window to see who was at the door. "It's Mom," he said, his voice flat. "She probably tracked Dad's phone to find me." I made a quick decision. "Go into the bedroom, Tommy. Close the door and put on headphones if you have them. Let me handle this." He nodded and disappeared, understanding intuitively that this confrontation was not for his ears. I opened the door but didn't invite Sandra in. She pushed past me anyway, her eyes scanning my apartment as if looking for evidence of crimes against her family. "I know exactly what you're doing," she said without preamble. "Manipulating Tommy, turning him against me. You couldn't control Michael and me anymore, so now you're going after my son. Tommy is my grandson too," I said calmly. "And he came to see me because he wanted to, not because I manipulated him. You filled his head with poison about me, made him think I was some kind of monster. Do you have any idea what you've done to my family?" I felt the familiar tug of guilt, the old impulse to apologize and smooth things over. But I also felt something stronger, the hard-won understanding of my own worth that had carried me through 2 years of difficult but necessary solitude. "Sandra, I never spoke badly about you to Tommy. I didn't need to. He's old enough to see the truth for himself." "What truth? That I was worried about your mental health? That I tried to protect my family from your increasing instability? The truth that you recorded yourself mocking me and sharing those recordings with friends? The truth that you systematically undermined my relationship with Tommy because you resented my closeness to him? The truth that you saw me as a source of money rather than a person deserving of respect?" Sandra's facade cracked. "You were taking over, acting like Tommy's mother instead of his grandmother. Someone had to set boundaries. The only boundaries needed were protection from your cruelty. And since you were never going to stop being cruel, I had to protect myself. By destroying my marriage? By turning my son against me? By refusing to accept abuse? If that destroyed your marriage, perhaps the marriage was built on the wrong foundation." Sandra stood in my living room shaking with rage, and for a moment I saw her clearly. Not the calculating manipulator I'd built up in my mind, but a deeply insecure woman who had never learned to build relationships based on mutual respect. Someone who saw love as a zero-sum game, where my close relationship with Tommy somehow diminished her own. I felt sorry for her, which surprised me, but I also felt absolutely certain that my boundaries had been necessary and appropriate. "I want you to stay away from Tommy," she said, her voice trembling. "He's confused right now because of the divorce, but he'll realize eventually that you manipulated him. Sandra, Tommy isn't confused. He's hurt by the choices you and Michael made. But that hurt didn't come from me. It came from watching his parents lie and manipulate instead of simply admitting they'd made mistakes. We never lied. You told him I was mentally ill when you knew I wasn't. You told him I didn't want to see him when what I actually said was that I wouldn't accept disrespect anymore. You told him I tried to steal money, when what actually happened was that I stopped giving it away freely. Every one of those was a lie, Sandra. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact moment when she realized that her version of events would no longer hold up to scrutiny. Tommy was old enough now to ask difficult questions, to compare what he'd been told with what he could observe for himself. "This isn't over," she said finally. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It's been over for 2 years. The only question now is whether you're going to keep fighting a war that ended when I stopped participating." After Sandra left, I sat quietly in my living room for a few minutes, processing what had just happened. The confrontation I'd dreaded for so long had finally occurred, and I'd emerged not unscathed, but intact. More than intact. I'd been strong. Tommy emerged from the bedroom, pulling off his headphones. "Is she gone?" "Yes. Are you okay?" "Yeah. I heard some of it through the door. She really doesn't get it, does she? That you didn't turn me against her. She did that herself. Sometimes it's easier to blame other people than to look at our own actions," I said. "Your mother is hurting right now, and hurt people sometimes hurt other people. Are you going to let me keep visiting?" "As long as you want to, and as long as your father agrees. But Tommy, I need you to understand something important. I'm not trying to be a replacement for your mother, no matter what problems you're having with her. I'm your grandmother, and I love you. But you still need to work on building a healthy relationship with both your parents. Even Mom? Especially your mom. She loves you, even if she doesn't always show it in the best ways. And you're going to need that relationship, regardless of what happens between your parents." He nodded solemnly, accepting this wisdom with the gravity that had become characteristic of him. My grandson was growing up too fast, forced into emotional maturity by his parents' divorce. But there was strength in his understanding that reassured me. When Michael came to pick up Tommy later that evening, he lingered at my door for a few minutes. "Sandra was here," I told him. "I figured she might track us down. She's not handling the separation well. She keeps talking about fighting for full custody, about proving that everyone is against her." "Michael, I need you to understand something. My relationship with Tommy isn't about taking sides in your divorce. It's about being his grandmother, which is something I should have been allowed to be all along. I know, and I'm grateful that you're willing to be in his life despite everything we put you through. I'm not doing it for you or for Sandra. I'm doing it for Tommy and for myself. Because grandparent and grandchild relationships are valuable in their own right, not just as extensions of other family relationships." Michael nodded. "Mom, can I ask you something? Are you happy now? Without us, I mean?" I considered the question carefully. I'm happier than I've been in years. I have friends, hobbies, interests that don't revolve around managing other people's problems. I've discovered parts of myself that got lost in all the caregiving and crisis management. That's good. I'm glad, and I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that you deserved better from us. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that I deserved better too. After they left, I called Rosa to tell her about the day. We talked for an hour, dissecting every nuance of the conversations, celebrating the fact that I'd maintained my boundaries while still opening the door to a relationship with Tommy. "You see," Rosa said, "you can have love without sacrifice. You can have family without accepting abuse. It just took patience and courage to wait for the right kind of relationships to develop." That night, as I prepared for bed, I reflected on how much had changed. 2 years earlier, Sandra's angry visit would have left me shaken and uncertain, questioning my own perceptions and wondering if I'd been too harsh. Now, I felt clear and calm. I'd stated my boundaries kindly but firmly, refused to be drawn into old patterns of manipulation, and maintained my dignity throughout. The months that followed brought a new kind of family dynamic. Tommy visited every other weekend, sometimes accompanied by Michael, sometimes alone as he grew more confident navigating the city. We developed our own traditions, Saturday afternoon walks through Central Park, where I'd tell him stories about the New York I remembered from decades past. Visits to the Museum of Natural History, where his childhood fascination with marine biology was rekindled. Quiet evenings working on art projects together. His teenage energy channeled into the same sort of creative expression that had become so important to my own healing. Michael and Sandra's divorce proceeded slowly and acrimoniously. Sandra fought for full custody, arguing that Michael was an unfit parent for allowing Tommy to have a relationship with me. The judge, however, was more interested in Tommy's own preferences and well-being than in Sandra's grievances about in-laws. In family court, I was called as a witness. Sandra's lawyer tried to paint me as a manipulative figure who had deliberately destroyed a family out of spite. Michael's lawyer, armed with documentation of Sandra's harassment campaign and false reports to Adult Protective Services, painted a very different picture. But the most powerful testimony came from Tommy himself, now 14, and articulate enough to explain his own feelings to the judge. He spoke about feeling caught in the middle of adult conflicts he didn't understand, about being told lies regarding his grandmother's health and motivations, about watching his parents fight over money, while his grandmother quietly removed herself from the situation rather than escalating it. The judge awarded joint custody, but noted in his decision that Tommy was old enough to have input into his living arrangements. Tommy chose to spend most of his time with Michael, visiting Sandra on weekends. More importantly, the judge specifically noted that both parents should encourage Tommy's relationship with his paternal grandmother, as it appeared to be healthy and supportive. Sandra's campaign to paint me as disruptive had backfired completely. Instead of proving that I was a negative influence, the legal proceedings had documented years of her harassment and manipulation. The court record now contained official recognition of my competence and the appropriateness of my relationship with Tommy. But perhaps the most significant change was in Michael himself. The divorce had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his marriage, about his own role in enabling Sandra's treatment of me, and about the kind of father and son he wanted to be going forward. One evening in late spring, almost a year after that first phone call, Michael came to visit me alone, not to ask for money or help with logistics, but simply to talk. "Mom, I've been going to therapy," he told me as we sat in my living room, sharing tea and cookies. "Trying to understand how things got so messed up, how I let Sandra treat you the way she did for so long. What has therapy taught you?" That I was afraid of conflict. That it seemed easier to let Sandra be angry with you than to have her be angry with me. I threw you under the bus to keep my marriage peaceful, and that was cowardly. I appreciated his honesty, but I needed him to understand the full scope of what had happened. "Michael, it wasn't just about avoiding conflict with Sandra. You also avoided dealing with your own feelings about your father's death, about becoming the head of the family when you weren't ready, about accepting financial help from me when you wanted to be independent." He nodded slowly. "Dr. Peterson, my therapist, says something similar, that I made you the repository for all my complicated feelings about dependence and independence, childhood and adulthood. It was easier to let Sandra criticize you than to examine why I felt so conflicted about accepting help from my mother. And how do you feel now? Grateful, ashamed of how I behaved, but grateful that you didn't give up on me completely. Grateful that Tommy still has you in his life. Grateful that you showed him what self-respect looks like." We talked for 3 hours that night, the first real conversation we'd had in years. Not a negotiation or a crisis management session, but an actual sharing of thoughts and feelings between two adults who happened to be mother and son. When he was getting ready to leave, Michael paused at the door. "Mom, I know I don't have any right to ask this after everything that's happened, but do you think, someday, we might be able to have a real relationship again? Not the old one where you gave and we took, but something more balanced?" "I'd like that," I said. "But it will take time. Trust takes longer to rebuild than it does to destroy." "I understand. I'm willing to wait and to do the work." As I watched him walk down the hallway toward the elevator, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope for a genuine relationship with my son. Not hope based on wishful thinking or desperate need, but hope grounded in evidence of real change. The transformation wasn't instant or complete. There were setbacks. Moments when Michael fell back into old patterns of assuming my availability without asking. Times when I had to remind him that boundaries weren't suggestions but requirements. But gradually, slowly, we began building something new. Tommy thrived in this healthier family dynamic, with the bitter conflict between his parents settled into something more manageable, and with the freedom to have an honest relationship with me. He grew into a young man of remarkable emotional intelligence and integrity. He still wanted to be a marine biologist, it turned out, and I helped him research summer programs and volunteer opportunities at the New York Aquarium. On his 15th birthday, Tommy asked if we could have a small party at my apartment. Not because it was convenient, or because I would pay for everything, but because he wanted to celebrate in the place that had become a refuge for him during his parents' difficult divorce. I invited Rosa, George, several friends from the senior center, and a few of Tommy's friends from school. Michael brought a homemade cake, something he'd learned to bake in his cooking class, part of learning to live independently after 20 years of marriage. Even Mrs. Chen from next door stopped by with flowers from her window box garden. As I watched Tommy blow out his candles, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about him rather than people who expected something from him, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what healthy love looked like. Mutual, respectful, joyful. No one was performing for anyone else's approval. No one was keeping score of favors and obligations. We were simply people who chose to be together because we enjoyed each other's company. After the party, as we cleaned up paper plates and wrapping paper, Tommy pulled me aside. "Grandma Ellie, thank you for teaching me that I don't have to accept bad treatment from people just because I love them." "You're welcome, sweetheart. But you taught me the same thing, you know. Your courage in seeking me out when your parents said you couldn't, your honesty about what you observed, all of that helped me stay strong in my boundaries." "Really? Really?" We taught each other. As the sun set that night, painting my apartment in the familiar gold light that I'd learned to capture in my watercolors, I reflected on the long journey from that devastating voice recording to this moment of quiet celebration. The path had been difficult, often lonely, sometimes frightening, but it had led to something I'd never imagined possible. Genuine relationships based on mutual respect rather than need, obligation, or fear. Now, as I approach my 75th birthday, I can honestly say that these have been the best years of my life, not because they've been easy, but because they've been authentic. I wake up each morning knowing that the people in my life choose to be there, not because they need something from me, but because they value who I am. I still paint, still volunteer at the literacy center, still take evening walks with Rosa through the changing neighborhoods of Queens. George and I have developed a comfortable routine of movies and dinners, companionship without drama or demands. My apartment is exactly as I want it. Peaceful, light-filled, decorated with art I love and furniture that suits my needs. Tommy is 16 now, a junior in high school, already talking about colleges with strong marine biology programs. He still visits regularly, but our relationship has evolved into something more friendship-like, less dependent. He comes to me for advice, shares his excitement about new discoveries in oceanography, helps me set up new technology when my arthritis makes it difficult. It's a balanced relationship, the kind I never knew was possible. Michael and I have rebuilt our connection slowly and carefully. He remarries next year, a lovely woman named Janet who treats him well and has never asked me for money or free babysitting. When he told me about the engagement, his first concern was whether Janet and I would get along, not whether I would help pay for the wedding. The shift in his thinking is profound and genuine. Even Sandra has found a kind of peace, though our relationship remains distant, and probably always will. She's in therapy now too, finally addressing the insecurities and control issues that made her so threatened by my presence in her family. She's learned to co-parent with Michael more effectively, and while she'll never be someone I choose to spend time with, she's no longer actively working to sabotage my relationships with the people I love. Sometimes people ask me if I have any regrets about the way I handled the crisis with my family. Do I wish I'd tried harder to work things out? Do I miss the closeness we had before, even if it was built on an unhealthy dynamic? The answer is complicated. I grieve for the years I spent accepting so little, for the woman I was who believed she had to purchase love with endless service and sacrifice. I'm sad about the time Tommy and I lost because of his parents' initial refusal to acknowledge their wrongdoing. I wish Michael had found the courage to choose truth over convenience earlier in his marriage. But I don't regret drawing boundaries. I don't regret refusing to accept abuse. I don't regret choosing dignity over convenience, self-respect over the illusion of family harmony. Most importantly, I don't regret discovering that I am enough, exactly as I am, without reference to how useful I am to other people. That revelation, so simple and yet so revolutionary, has been worth every difficult day of the journey to reach it. If this story has moved you, please like and subscribe to help me continue sharing these experiences. But more than that, I hope it inspires you to examine your own relationships, your own boundaries, your own understanding of what you deserve from the people you love. You don't have to set your hair on fire to keep other people warm. You don't have to accept cruelty as the price of connection. You don't have to purchase love with endless sacrifice. You are enough, exactly as you are. You deserve respect, kindness, and genuine affection. And if the people in your life can't provide those things, it's not your job to teach them how by accepting less than you deserve. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for others, is to refuse to participate in relationships that require you to deny your own worth. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to miss you enough to change. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for witnessing this journey from doormat to empowered woman, to grandmother who loves herself enough to demand respect from others. Thank you for being part of a community that understands that true love never requires the sacrifice of your dignity. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of love simply because you exist. Anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve access to your beautiful heart.